Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? And thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. Alright, today's video, what are we going to talk about? It's one of the things I love the most about rides. It's that main operator panel. I love main operator panels. Operator panels in general, they're so much fun to deal with. So, let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Alright, if this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. This is your new favorite home. Take a look at all the videos I've made. I've made a ton of them. I cover all sorts of topics, very interesting, in-depth, detail. You could scan through them. A lot of people listen to them in the background. I take no offense to not watching the video. But this one's going to have some imagery with it, so it'll be somewhat good. Alright, today's video we're talking about the operating panel, more specifically like the control panels that ride operators use to actually control the rides and control the equipment. So where do we start with this? Well, way back when, a long time ago, there was no main operator panel because the main operator was just that. They were the main operator. Things way back, if you think way back to Switchback Railroad and things like that that were built that had no block system, no control system, no automation. It simply relied on the operator to say, well, we're going to take this coach and we're going to move it here. We need to pull this one back up here and send this one over there. That was the main operator doing that. So after a while, roller coasters, ride devices started getting more intense. They started getting quicker. So they needed to develop things to slow them down and control them. Things like brakes. Brakes was one of the first things that was put onto rides that was like, hey, we need to prevent these things from colliding into each other. So they started installing brakes. Was this where the main operator panel was born? Kind of, yeah. So now it took the main operator and prevented them from so much like walking around and doing things around the platform area. And now these people were actually standing over next to brake runs and operating big long levers that went through the floor. There is footage out there where it still shows old rides that still used a main release lever to open the brakes. A lot of them used opposing release levers, so you had to push them apart to actually open the brakes up and let the coach come through. So that started pinning down the operator to one section. As the rides got faster, trains got heavier, they started needing more mechanical advantage, more so than just brake levers and counterbalances working. So when that happened, they started moving to pneumatic pressure. So what does that mean? Well, pneumatic pressure, it wasn't something that the operator can just open and close by hand anymore. They needed more to it. They not only needed a valve, because you can't just squeeze air pressure with your hand, but you needed air pressure in valves, so you can open the valve up and say we're going to supply the air pressure to that brake over there. Then we're going to open this valve up, supply the air pressure to that brake over there. So now you had to take these valves and put them in a central location so the main operators weren't walking all over the place doing all sorts of things. The operator console started being developed. The console is typically what's referred to as a stand. This is what the panel goes on top of. It's the thing that elevates it up. Why are the panels elevated up, you might ask? That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. I can't believe you heard me all the way through there and you asked that question. That was a brilliant question. All right, the main reason for the operator panels being elevated up is because the operators needed to be able to stand or sit at them depending on the length. Most of them starting were standing, and then operators commonly need to sit at them. Well, do you sit underneath something like this is my desk, and I could sit underneath it right now. Do you typically do that? No, you don't, because there's more stuff inside that operator panel that you can't just put your feet out underneath. So most operator panels, you end up getting a stool or something like that to sit close to it, but not right at it. A lot of operator panels are still just standing only. So you have to raise that panel up in order to get it within a range to where your arms and everybody's visual range can still stand and see the platform and see what's going on all at the same time. In the later revision main operator panels, they started putting valves in there. The valves would control the air brakes, and they would control things like, when they came up later on, air gates. They would control the air gates, air brakes. When those valves were added, those operators had to stand there and move those valves in certain orders. Now, one of the things I got a kick out of was this past little bit going to Knoebels over this last year and watching this little boat ride that was going around there, and the young lady operating the ride was moving all these valves. The ride still operated off of these original mechanical valves that I believe those were, I mean, they looked like they were hydraulic. I'm not actually sure if they were hydraulic or pneumatic in those valves, but they looked like water valves. So she would open and close these valves, which would move actuators off to the side and hold the boats. So she became not only the operator, but she was now the control system for the ride as well. If she operated two valves in parallel with each other, it would open up two blocks at the same time and allow two boats to come forward at the same time. It's a good move to be able to say, like, okay, let's just advance these all at the same time, but it's not quite a great move if you have bigger, heavier things that might crash into each other. You don't necessarily want to do that. All right, so on the main operator panel, valves started popping up, and then one thing that was necessary from valves was now going to be pressure. Now that operator needed to know what pressure the system was at because they needed to monitor for an unsafe condition. So they would look down and say, okay, my valves, I could open and close, and then they could not only see the pressure that was going to the brakes, they could see the pressures that was coming in as well. And if they saw that incoming pressure starting to come down, and they started noticing a lack of performance in their brakes out there on the ride, they could stop the ride and say, hey, something's wrong, we're losing pressure. There might be something like an air leak on one of the lines. Airlines commonly blow hoses off of stuff. So there might be an air leak in a line, or it might be something like the main air compressor has gone down and is no longer working. Now, older rides like that, they did typically started using electrical motors for lift hills. So a lot of times what they would do is they would simply go down and they would throw a knife disconnect switch. Just like an old-timey movie, you'd throw a knife disconnect switch and that lift motor would start up. But because there wasn't yet this block system to control the individual blocks around the ride, it was simply just an on and off thing. Once you sent the train, it went up and over the lift, and that was pretty much it. All right, so we moved now from those pneumatic controls, and now we say, okay, we started building bigger trains, and we started moving them faster around the track. So more weight, more speed. What does that mean? Well, it means we need more control. So what evolved from there? It's like, well, we started taking some of the control, or a lot of the control, away from the main operator.
How about no?
The main operator was still able to do things, but they weren't able to do certain things that we deemed safety.
I'm done for.
Safety things we weren't able to let them do. So what is that? Well, in the invention of multiple units running around the track at the same time, we said we needed to create a system that prevented these from colliding with each other. So was born the block safety system. The block safety system basically says no two vehicles can operate the same space at the same time. So block zones are guarded with brakes. Brakes prevent the train from rolling into the next block until the next block reads open. Now that's complicated. Well, what happens when that train won't roll into the next block? Why? That's the first question. Why? Well, we took all the operator out of the equation from that, and now we're relying on a set of, at the time, it was electromechanical relays and things like that operating. So now we needed to know why the train would not roll into the next block. So we said, well, you know what? We need some sort of override to make the train roll into the next block. And then we needed some sort of an indicator to say if the train could or could not roll into the next block. So on the control panel, we started taking a lot of these things away from the operator, and we gave it back to them slightly in the forms of buttons and switches. There's all sorts of buttons on the control panel to do everything, and all sorts of switches to do it as well. The older the panel is, the more buttons and switches and lights there were on it, but that was because it still heavily relied on the operator to make all the decisions that the ride needed. Now, the operator could sit there and say, it won't roll into zone number 2 over there won't roll into the second brakes, and they could still get on the panel and turn some switches and stuff and say, okay, I want to open the brakes and let that train roll through. And they could still get the ride to work that way. Well, a lot of times, really quickly, as they developed the control system to the ride, they said, well, we don't want the operator to be able to do that because sometimes the operator makes a mistake.
That isn't very reassuring.
Sometimes they don't see. They're like, oh, I didn't realize that other train was still sitting out of the brake a little bit, and I rolled the second one in and the two hit each other. Well, that wasn't an acceptable form or fashion, so they said, well, we can't let the operator do that anymore. So the buttons and switches became suggestions now. It's not so much a command to do it, it's a suggestion. So now when you say, I want to press this button to make that thing work, the button confirms with the relay logic, or these days the actual control logic in the computer, to say, is it safe to allow this function to actually happen out on the ride? And the ride will typically come back and say, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. Now, it's not just that cut and dry because there's multiple levels of functions that are in these control panels. Now, along with this invention of all these buttons and switches being put on everything, we still needed to know the status of these things. So we started putting little tiny light bulbs. They look like little Christmas bulbs inside the buttons or right next to the button. And we started making indicator lights. The indicator lights would have their own control system to tell the ride operator what is going on. So you have things like indicator lights all over your block zones. They tell you if the block is free. They tell you if it's occupied. They tell you if the zone is functioning properly. They tell you if there's a fault in the zone. So you can have 4 individual little indicators for each zone. Now, that was one of the things, that's still a lot of information for the ride operators to take in, but they weren't making all the decisions now. So now these buttons and functions started coming away from the ride operators and started just being used as all right, this is more of just information now. This is for when people like the maintenance crew would show up to the ride for a ride fault. We would need to see all those lamps and buttons and switches to know where everything was and what the ride was trying to do. So flash forward a little bit and we evolve from relay logic into actual I/O logic or computer logic, and then we introduced something called a panel view. Panel view is what a lot of you are familiar with when you look at a ride control panel these days, especially on a bigger ride. The panel view is a computer screen essentially that now gives direct information from what the ride is actually trying to do to the operator. Now, operators typically look at an operator screen on the panel view, which tells them basic information. It's a lot more detailed and accurate information than simply lights on a panel, but it's still the basic concept of lights on a panel. Now, maintenance would get in there, and maintenance can switch to maintenance panel view screens, and the screen that maintenance clicks to will tell the maintenance guy even more information than that. So on the operator panel, when they go up there, they might say, oh, the panel view says there's a 224 fault in block C, and that's all they know. When maintenance comes up and puts in special keys to see special things because we have privilege. Okay, so we put our keys in, turn it, and we go to the maintenance screen and we go to block C and say, what is your problem? And the panel view might be set up in such a way to where it says what the fault is on there, and then it says it might have a proximity switch error on switch number 234 over there. Or it might be something where you go to the block C screen and you see a bunch of little green and red indicators all over the section to indicate things like whether a sensor is high, whether there's air pressure, where there's a light curtain being blocked or something like that. And then it might have a particular sensor outlined in red and flashing saying that it has a problem with this sensor. And it gives maintenance more of a focused, like, okay, now we know to go look at that thing. Now, the ride programming is only as good as it can be. Sometimes it says there's a problem with there's a sensor, but it's actually not. It's somewhere else on the ride. But that's the way it visualizes the fault. Okay, so that is control panels coming up, where they are, how we use them. So let's dive into some types of control panels, and then we'll talk about how they're made and what they're put together with as we go down. All right, so the first one is going to be the main control panel, also known as your main operator panel. This is the one that a singular, typically, person sits at or stands at, and it has control over almost the entire ride. The main operator panel is where the main operator stands, and they have control over everything like ride stops, e-stops, special start, special function, anything like that. The main operator panel is sometimes down next to the ride. Sometimes it's at the front, sometimes it's at the back. It all depends on the rides. If you're going to bigger rides with lots of units moving around there, then a lot of times that main operator panel is not only at the front of the ride or at the back of the ride, but it might be elevated to see more things. A lot of roller coasters that use dual load stations have elevated operator panels where you can see out. Top Thrill used to have one up there. A lot of Disney rides where they want to oversee multiple trains being unloaded and loaded at the same time, they will have an elevated platform to see the entire line of trains and see what's happening there before they operate the ride. Then that gets into secondary panels. Secondary panels are what you typically see while you're being loaded onto the ride. So you typically stand there behind the air gates, and we stay off the air gates, right? And then the operators will come in and say, all right, everyone get on, everyone get off. They'll do the whole thing. Those operators are typically standing at secondary panels. Now, the secondary panels are put down where the vehicle's being loaded for a specific reason. That's because those, most of the time they're 2, sometimes they're 3, sometimes they're 4 operators are needed to agree to send the train out. So what happens is that when you're being loaded onto the train, the air gates might open and you might have an operator, if the train's moving right to left, coming into the station, leaving the station, you might have an operator standing there next to the air gates on the left-hand side. And then as you cross through the train, you might look over and you might see an operator standing at the back of the train on the right-hand side. So when the train is loaded and ready to go, and they want to dispatch the train, the operators on the right-hand side, or the unload position, those people are going to look down the train and make sure that there's nobody out of the seat, everyone's in the train, they're ready to go, that the platform area is clear, meaning there's no straggling people standing up there that could jump back over to the train itself. Disney and places like that will put a line down on the ground and say as long as the people are on that side of the line, they're fine. A lot of parks run this to where there's an exit gate and you have to be on that side of the air gate or the exit gate in order to start the ride. Now, a lot of times that back person will also go over and check the exit gate and make sure it's shut as well. This is all dependent on procedure, how fast the vehicle comes in and out of the station, and how quickly it can stop. That determines all these distances. Now, the front person is looking for the same exact things, but they are also in control of the crowd. The crowd that's all standing behind the air gates and no one's leaning on the air gates or shaking them. That operator is there looking to make sure that everyone's seated on the train ready to go and that there's not anybody out and about on the other side. That all the people are back behind the air gates and no one's leaning over trying to get something from the train from their buddy that just got on or something like that. They are watching the crowd and making sure the train is clear. Once those 2 operators, or it could be 2 operators on the same side, being 4 operators total, or maybe 3, once they all agree, they typically give some sort of a hand signal, right? Whether it's like a release hand signal, something like that. And then they will dispatch the train. It takes typically both buttons on both panels being pressed at the same time to dispatch the train. Now, a lot of the times, programs have all sorts of little caveats in them to allow things to happen into or out of sequence. So depending on the manufacturer, this is not a standard from the manufacturer at all, but it's actually depending on the manufacturer and the park and the design of the ride. They may say that, hey, once you press the dispatch buttons both at the same time, as soon as the operators press them, they can let go. And then the train just goes out of the station. Some parks, this is a much more common thing, is that the ride operators have to not only press the dispatch buttons, but they have to hold them. Goes act as a dead man switch. So they have to hold them the entire time the train is leaving the station and the entire time the train is coming back in. Have you ever gone out of a station or coming into a station on a train and then it suddenly just stops and pauses for a couple seconds and then starts going again and finishes either leaving or coming in? That's because one of your operators took their hand off the button. Now, sometimes these are just genuine mistakes. They're doing something, they might be looking around, and their hand comes off of it momentarily and the train stops. That's fine, no one's perfect. Sometimes it's because someone is coming up to an exit gate or maybe trying to do something at an entrance gate and they're like, hey, you can't be here, you need to go back, and the person's like, oh no, I just need to go in, and then once they grab that gate, the person's like hands off because they stopped motion and they needed to take care of those people now and find out like you can't come over here, and then once it's safe to do so, they resume and it starts going again. All right, so those are your secondary panels. Then what you get into is maintenance panels. Maintenance panels are also all over the ride. They're pretty much at every single segment where there is a brake, a block, a booster wheel, something like that. They're at those areas. Maintenance panels are very small operator panels that only typically function whatever is in that area. So if I'm on a ride and I go out to a brake segment, there's typically out there what's called a maintenance panel. The maintenance panel will be sitting there and it will have things like a ride start, a ride stop, and a MOM or momentary function button. Now that momentary function button allows me to do things in a maintenance mode. Like if I switch the ride into manual mode, or my buddy switches the ride into manual mode, and I say, I need to go out and watch those brakes work. Maybe the brakes are remote and I can't quite see them, but I don't want a train running through there. So my buddy watches the panel, he keeps it in manual mode, I walk out to the brake segment and I go up to that momentary operation button on the maintenance panel, and I push that button in, and when I push that button in, all those brakes open up. And I can see, okay, everything's functioning properly. Why would you want to do this? To see finite function. So when you go there, I could push and hold those buttons and start exercising the brakes. Exercising is just a term we use when you get the brakes to open and close, and they keep doing it. Because in the morning time, sometimes there's condensation or moisture that's built up inside of a valve. You push that button and you might get water shooting out of the side of something. It's like, okay, as you exercise them, you can look down the row. If you've got 5 brakes sitting there, you can make sure each one is opening and closing and doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Another one that happens is sometimes you develop an air leak in the brakes. And air leaks sometimes aren't heard. If you just exercise the brakes, it sounds fine. But if you push that button in and hold it, they'll open, and then you might start to hear air leaking out of something, and then you might be able to stand there and go, oh, brake number 3 right there. That's leaking air. And then you might know, well, I've got a cylinder that's bypassing internally, and now that brake cylinder needs to come out and be repaired and put back together because the ride's going to air out if you let that operate for the day. So those are maintenance panels. Same thing if I go to booster wheels, I hit that button, I could turn the booster wheels on and make them all run the same direction. It's like, okay, lifts typically have maintenance panels at multiple points up the lift because that's the entire element is the lift. So I might have one like the floorless coaster we had. It had a momentary operational panel down at the base of the lift where I can jog the booster wheels. I can also jog the lift, and I could slowly turn that chain and watch that chain go really slow. And then I could go midway up the lift, do the same thing there, not the booster wheels, but I could jog the chain and then go up on top, and I could jog the chain from there. Helpful to listen for the chain sliding through everything, making sure it's not making any sounds or anything like that. And up on the top, depending on your ride, you might have something like an automatic oiler that oils the chain. The oiler only works with the chain running. So it might be one of those things you might need to bump the chain and turn it on just to see the oiler come up and make pressure. It's like, okay, those are maintenance functions. At the same time, those panels are used for erasing blocks typically. So when a ghost train happens and you might have a ghost train sitting in a block, you will need to go into a very special maintenance mode and do a block erase. That's where you go out there and you say, there's nothing here, and a couple people hit their buttons at the same time. It typically takes at least one at the block where you're at, and typically takes one at the main operating panel, really far apart, separated from each other at the same time under e-stop conditions, and you can erase a block. And you say, okay, it's not there anymore. This is necessary from time to time, especially if you're out working on something and you accidentally flag a proximity sensor. Guess what? Now you've just told the ride there's a train in that block when there's not one. So you need to do a block erase function. But that's also what those panels are used for. You'll typically have that ride start button in there, or maybe an alternate button. And when you put it in the right mode, that button will be able to do the block erase function. 2 people, sometimes 3 people needed. Everyone hits their buttons, it erases the block. The block erase function is where the Smiler went bad, basically. They went out there and they said, okay, they were able to reset the blocks without noticing that there was a train between blocks, and then it started the ride back up. That's a dangerous function to get into. It's one of the things, like, typically manufacturers do not allow you or do not want you to do block erase functions with vehicles or with people on the track. So it's like, always unload the people first and then go into your maintenance modes after that. All right. In the control room, a lot of times, there's also maintenance panels in control rooms. These do things, are typically indicator driven, but there's also sometimes key switches and other things on there to allow certain safety functions to happen. Like on spinning rides, like a Frisbee, we had key switches in the cabinets that you had to go into and turn on to do a overspeed test, because when you were telling the ride to go as fast as it could, whether it was be the center spin or whether it would be a swing, it would only go to its program parameters, and then you needed special keys turned on inside control cabinets to basically override those parameters and tell the motors to go faster.
These go to 11.
Now what we did there is we said, turn the key switch, and we said go faster, and it would tell the drive to go faster, and as soon as those motors sped up just a little bit too much, the other controllers that were watching those signals would say it's going too fast, and it would shut the system off. That was a safety function we did on purpose. Top Spins had the same thing. Lots of flat rides have these overspeed tests that you can do. And newer rides, sometimes they do them right on the panel views. So, okay, let's talk about push button crack. Like, what is the push button? The push button is the indicators that we look at when we see ride operator panels. We see those push buttons. What are those push buttons? Those, most of the parks use these. Those are Allen Bradley 800T illuminated and shrouded, aluminum guarded push buttons. They're like the best thing to look at. They're so nice, and it's so nice. Those are also really expensive. Most people don't understand how expensive those things are. When I was purchasing buttons for rides, because you'd have to do it from time to time, you purchase buttons. A lot of times what goes bad is underneath the button there's a contact block. Right here. Here's an e-stop, emergency stop, right? This is the part you push on, but the part that actually does the electrical work is this little black guy right here. This little guy does the actual opening or closing of the circuit to make the button function. So this is what's called a contact block. The contact block is typically the thing that goes bad when you have button pushing problems. The base, not so much. The actual operator on top, not so much. It's typically the contact block that has problems. So when you buy buttons, we would buy top-of-the-line buttons because we would want to be able to just say when the button went bad, you replace the contact block with a new one, and it was good. And then on those buttons, they would have lenses that you could take off, unscrew, and put different colors on to make green, red, blue, anything like that. There's too much sun. I completely forgot to close that. Man, the sun's coming through. It's too bright. My eyes are so sensitive to light. Anyways, So those push buttons, you typically just replace that bottom contact block, and then the ones that are sitting in direct sunlight, sometimes you have to replace the lens cap on the operator so it's nice and clean again and you could see it, but most of the time not. Just a little light bulb on the inside for the ones that are illuminated, some of them are not. The next thing we're going to talk about is indicator lights. Indicator lights, like we were talking about on the panels that show up, it's just a single little LED that sits there, it turns on and off. And it gives you a function. It tells you what's happening around the ride. Now, you got to remember, a lot of rides aren't really complicated. They don't have the big panel views on them and stuff. They are simply just a handful of buttons, maybe a handful of indicator lights, and that's it. There's nothing else on those panels, so the indicator lights become absolutely critical. The buttons, a lot of times, not this particular one, but the illuminated buttons on there also have feedback on them. They have lights on the inside so that when you push the button, if I push the button all the way down, the light will turn on and go solid. Now, is that a part of the contact block on the back? Well, you could wire it that way to make it look like that, sure. But that light is actually typically controlled by the programmable logic controller, the PLC, that's in the ride. So once you push the button down, the PLC acknowledges that that button was pushed by turning the light on. So that's a cool feedback. Is this button working? You push it down, and the light turns on. And it's like, yeah, it is. It's like, okay, cool. Just by pushing it down, I now know that the PLC can see it shut, and it's telling me the PLC is acknowledging that that button is being pushed. Very cool. So there is a function every single ride has that checks these lights. It's quite simply called a lamp test. Typically, lights are referred to as lamps. So the lamp test, when you push it, it will illuminate every single lamp or light on the entire panel, everywhere, on every panel. So when you turn that thing on, it illuminates all the lights. Why is that helpful to know? Because you might have an indicator sitting there, like on an older Vekoma, that your air pressure is on. So your air pressure is on, and it's like, all right, I've got that sitting there illuminated. I've had this call multiple times. I go out to a ride, they say the air pressure went away. It's like, all right, well, let's go out there. What's going on? And they said, well, see the light bulb that should say it has air pressure? Yep, it's off. It's like, okay, so I reach right over and push the lamp test button. That light does not turn on. So before I go out looking at air compressors, checking pressure, wiring, or anything else, I push that button and it'll go, oh, the bulb's burnt out. Undo the thing, put a new bulb in there real quick, hit the button, or if the ride's still on, it'll just illuminate as soon as I put it in there. And it's like, there you go, it's working now. Sometimes we can ask operators to do that because there's no harm in pushing that lamp test button. It simply just makes everything light up. So when they say, oh, the air compressor light is off, we'll say push lamp test and see if it turns on. And they push lamp test and say, no, it doesn't turn on. It's like, okay, your lamp is burnt out. We'll be out there with a new bulb shortly. Or if they push the button and it does turn on, it's like, okay, the air compressor did shut off. Unload the ride, stop operation because you're about to lose air pressure. So the lamp test is very critical. On some rides, this is a really nice function. As soon as you turn the ride on, before you actually go through a startup process, I know Consign did a lot of these, as soon as you turn that key switch on to it, it starts the lamp test. And what it does is it causes everything on the ride to blink in just a standard blinking pattern, just blink, blink, blink. And the e-stop will blink out of sequence. So it'll be backwards. So you got all the lights blink, and then when they shut off, the e-stop illuminates, and vice versa. So it's sitting there doing that. And that allows you to walk around to all your panels. Remember all those maintenance panels? You could walk around to everything and make sure you could see them all blinking. If they're illuminated, you could see them all blinking at the same time. The next button we run into on the panel is momentary or maintain toggle switches. Now, what is momentary versus maintain? Well, start with a toggle switch. Toggle switch is a little button with this lever on it, something you could twist left or right. Think of like most commonly referred to as a selector switch. You can select to the left or you could select to the right. So momentary versus maintained. This is the same thing with buttons too. If I take one of these selector switches and go to the left and then let go of the switch, if it jumps back to the center, it's momentary, which means it needs me holding it the entire time, and when I let go, it shuts or it closes back. It goes either way. It might have multiple selections on it, but either way, when you let go, it jumps back to a off position or something like that. Maintained is where I take it and I say I click it to one position, and you typically hear them click, and then when you let go, it stays there. Momentary is something like a key switch for starting a car. You put the key in, turn it, you go to the start position, your starter turns on, and when you let go of that key, it goes back to run. That's momentary from that start to run position. Maintained, a light switch on the wall. It's in the off position, you flip it up, it stays in the on position. A lot of times those are used, not the light switches, but maintained switches are typically used for things like air gates and gates, because they say, oh, I want them open. So they go click, open, and the operator can walk away from it. And then I want to go closed, and it goes click, it's back to closed, and the operator can walk away from that. It's maintained in that position. Sometimes they're momentary. If the logic is being held inside the controller instead of at the button, they might just have a single button to push for those air gates. Push it one time, air gates open. Push it another time, air gates closed. So that's momentary versus maintained. That happens in buttons, switches, selectors, toggles, almost everything. The next one, key switches. Right? This is an Allen Bradley 800T key switch. There's the key that goes in it. This is maintained. Two positions. So I can put the key in this position, turn it, it's maintained in that position, and then depending on the key switch, sometimes I can remove the key, sometimes I can't. So where would we use key switches? Well, these are anytime we switch between modes. Now, a lot of panels are laid out in color-coded areas. So a lot of panels have green for stuff the operators can touch all the time. They have yellow. This is things that maintenance can touch all the time. And they have red, things that you can touch, but you're not supposed to touch them. So, for instance, the dispatch buttons are in the green side. They're like, go ahead and dispatch that thing. Unlock restraints, lock restraints, open and close air gates, ride start, all that stuff is in the green section. In the yellow section, things like block testing, speed controls, things like that. But a lot of them do not work until you turn the key on, and now the yellow section works. And maintenance can use those things. And then, of course, the red section is things like your e-stops, your ride stops, your things like that, things that will shut the ride down. Those are in the red section. Either one of those two, whether it's in maintenance mode or automatic, either one can do that. I do have a video about modes if you want to go see the difference between all the ride modes out there. But key switches are very important because there's a lot in the key switch that tells you everything about what you're doing. So for instance, this is going to be a maintenance mode type key switch. I put the key in, I turn it, and I can't remove it. So what do I do here? It's like, well, I don't want the maintenance guy walking away and leaving the ride in manual mode. So in order for the maintenance guy to get his key back out, I make it to where it can only be removed in the automatic position. So if I put it in automatic, turn it to manual, and then I try to walk away, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I can't. My key is there. I need to bring my key back over. Sometimes I'll use these as momentary. This is where it goes to the second position, but it doesn't lock. It spring loads right back. I say I only want a momentary thing to do that, and I don't want the maintenance guy to leave it in the on position. These are things like bypasses. That's what I'll use for that. So key switches have a lot of functions, a lot of use. The reason why I've got this guy is because the cylinder on the inside is bad. This is the key that goes with it, but it can also accept almost any other key because the tumblers on the inside are no good anymore on this. So this is one I got for free because it's no good on the inside anymore. Anyone could put a key in and do it. Next is the e-stop. This guy is located on pretty much every single ride, and they typically need to be tested. So most every ride, the e-stop is put in such a fashion to where when you press the e-stop, it opens power to something. So power was going through here, and it opened it up. Now typically e-stops aren't something they just want you to pull back up all of a sudden. It's a mushroom head. What are mushroom heads good for? Slapping. So that is one thing that OSHA and everybody else wants to make sure that anybody can just go and slap the thing down and the ride comes to a stop. Now the way e-stop circuits are set up, they're set up to mechanically interrupt power to almost everything. So controllers and things like that, if you've got a big motor that's running 3 phases through a big contactor, you have a little control voltage wire that runs into that contactor that makes it hold down. And when you hit that e-stop, it interrupts that control voltage, opens the big contactor so the big motor can't move. Now, typically they want some sort of other function to reset an e-stop. That's why a lot of these guys are out there. If you could tell, there's little arrows on it. This is a twist to release. So right now it's in the down position, but if I twist the knob just a little bit, it springs back up. So down, up. Now this is a lot of times we will also put locking e-stops on things. These are things to where it might be catastrophic if you release that e-stop in the wrong condition. We want to make sure that there's time or there's somebody else there to recover that e-stop. There's also some petty reasons behind locking e-stops. I have to admit, there's been plenty of times where the operators just mess with the ride and they're out there and they hit the e-stop and then they'll pull it back up and they're like, we don't know what happened. So you have to put a locking e-stop in there. That way the next time the operator tries that, you go out there and the e-stop is locked in the down position. I've been around plenty of operators that will do that. Like, I don't know what happened. It's like you unlock the e-stop and pull it up and they're like, oh, it wasn't me. It's like,
right.
All right, there are some petty people out there that unfortunately we have to guard against because they do things like push e-stops, turn control power off. They'll do things to randomly shut the ride down for no reason, but other than to get a break. So anyways, a lot of times the e-stop is illuminated and they do flash. One of the nice things I've seen on rides get programmed was the e-stop will blink when it's available, meaning that the ride's not in e-stop condition, so it sits there and blinks red, that it's ready to be used. And then a lot of times when you push it down like that, the cool thing I've seen, and I'm sure it's done lots of places, which I'd like to know, let me know what kind of e-stop signaling you've seen done, which is, I think is pretty cool. Now you can always look at the panel view or something and it might tell you, operator 2 e-stop pushed or something like that, because you got to remember almost every operator has an e-stop. And they're also all over rides typically. But one cool thing that I saw was that the e-stop was up, and then when you pushed it down, all the e-stops on the ride stopped blinking because the e-stop was no longer available, except for the one that was pushed down was solid red. And even after you pulled the e-stop head back up on there, it continued to stay solid red as an indicator that, hey, I was the last one pushed. So e-stops are pretty cool things. Okay, my friend over at Coasterclimax actually started building control panels for people to use at home. So I want to look at the construction of these control panels because the question is that are they good? Would you recommend these? What are they all about? So while we're doing control panel stuff, let's look at these control panels. So I'm on the Coasterclimax's website. I believe it's under shop. There they are. Now, when she first started building these, she approached me and asked if I would give her feedback on these panels. So I looked at what she was doing, looked at what she was using, and I said, yeah, everything was pretty much spot on the way panels are manufactured. The only difference, I said, you want to up the labeling on the buttons because the labeling looked a little homemade, understandably so, right? So she's up the labeling on them, and she offers, it's looking like 2 panels right now. Let's see, one's a 6-button Sims control and the 10-button Ride Sims control panel. Let's look at the 10-button. 159 pounds, which is, pretty sure that's per pound. That's not bad. What is that in US? Okay, so translated for my people here in the US, this is about $211 for this panel. Now, right off the top of the head, 10 buttons, $200. So each button is 20 bucks. You can look at it that way. That is an unfair statement to make because I know people right now, like, you can get buttons cheaper for this. No. Let's not go there. All right. So the way you look at control panels is you basically develop it by its per button cost. It's like, all right, these are basically $20 per buttons for a 10-button panel. Now, the thing that you don't factor into that when you tell people like it's $20 per button, the thing that's not factored in there is that there's the console, there's a platform that these sit into. That's that box that's sitting right there. Then there is, let's see, there's wiring involved. And the fact that these are built for use in computer games. Let's see. Bring through a ride operation straight to your desk with the custom-built Ride Sims control panel. This gives you, let's see, Ride Sims and No Limits too. I know I don't use No Limits anymore, just because I'm one of those Mac people. I'm on a Mac and I don't want to download Steam because I see my son all sorts of troubles with Steam and I don't like it. That's honestly what's preventing me from using No Limits because, man, I used to run No Limits like crazy. I love that program. It is flippin' awesome. So not only do you have everything that went into this, you have all the operators maintained. See, there's your maintained and the restraints and gates. And then I'm not sure what this one up is here. It might be a load or something. But you have 3 maintained switches, a key switch that goes on there, an e-stop, 2 dispatch buttons, and these are illuminated too, which is really cool. And then she's got it in a really nice enclosure. Now, and she obviously had to wire all this up. It's hooked up to a controller of some sort.
Hello guys, we have a slightly different video today, so make sure you hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. As you can see, we have a control panel here for Ride Sims, and it does also work for No Limits 2 as well, but this panel here is a custom order that I've received, and if you do want to get your own panel as well, follow me on TikTok and pop me a message on there where you can message me for any information about making these custom panels. So this one here is specifically for Ride Sims because that's what the person who ordered it specifically wanted, and this is a 10-button panel. So we have a power key, the game mode switch, which I will explain that later on, a function key, a e-stop reset key, the e-stop button itself, 2 dispatches, the restraint switch, the gate switch, and this switch as well opens up Ride Sims to the specific simulator that this was made for. So with this one I was requested specifically to have it work with Space Mountain, so this is what this is for. So this selects Station 1 and select Station 2. And then when you have it in the centre then, that will work then for most of the other simulators that is within Ride Sims as well. So to start off using this panel, it's very easy. So as you can see, it isn't quite finished yet. Not all of the labels are done, they are currently being made, but as soon as they are on the panel, this panel will be sent off. With the ones that are labelled, obviously we've got the dispatches labelled, the restraints, gates and the power key and reset labelled. So to start off with the panel, you take your key, you pop it in the slot and give it a twist. And as you can see, it all lights up. If I turn off this big light, the lighting doesn't look as good, but you can see the light's a bit better, all lit up. So you can press dispatch. For Baron you have to hold it for it to dispatch. So you just hold the dispatch, and if you let go, then obviously it does what Baron does. That's just in the game, which I find it quite realistic and quite cool. Again, dual dispatch, you got to press both of them for it to go. Now when it comes
Man,
back
when I
in
was
then,
playing games, I
press the
definitely would
dispatch
have
key
bought this.
and it brings up the floor. Open the restraints, open up the gates, and the gates open to let in the guests. Then once it's done that, you close the gates and then you can close the restraints. Another cool thing I've implemented as well is that say the gates are open on the switch, the dispatch buttons won't light up to obviously because they can't dispatch because the gates are open. Same as if the restraints are open as well. Both of these have to be closed for you to be able to dispatch to send the train out. And then hold it just like that. Now with Baron, you have a pre-show.
Alright, so that's really cool. I mean, that is a lot of programming. Obviously, it's got to interface with your computer, so there's, I believe she said an Adreno on the inside. So you start factoring in those other things, the control panel, the computer interface, the programming that went into that, mixed with the lights and the buttons and everything else working on there. And if you price all that stuff out together, even with really cheap buttons and things like that, which I don't recommend buying expensive buttons. I mean, if you want to spend 20 grand on a control panel, you can do that, obviously, but I'm very budget-minded person. So all that for $200 is a really good deal. Like, yeah, I would have definitely bought one of those back when I was playing roller coaster games. And I just don't anymore. I don't have the time for it, honestly. But I know I've had a lot of people ask me, like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. I do, since I partnered with her before, I'm not getting any kickback on this. I'm not getting money off of it. There's nothing going on like that. I'm getting zero for this information. I thought this was a good place to put this since I'm talking about control panels. But since I was talking with her, I wanted to use her panel as an example in this video. She did say that if you use the code, let me see here, if you use the code Ryan5, you will get a 5% discount on the panel. That's something's better than nothing, right? Like, that's pretty cool. So definitely, if you want to see more of that, check out Coasterclimax on her channel, and then check out the website, which is just coasterclimax.com. And check out those panels because they are pretty good, and that is honestly a really good price. By the time you're done doing everything, she's definitely giving away her labor for pretty much free putting those panels together, because that was a lot of time spent in that, putting all that together. Honestly, kind of wish I had one of those for here, like just do some stuff on that. That'd be pretty cool. Anyways, let's go over some of the general functions of the main control panel. So every ride is different. It depends on what the button is, what mode you're in, because a lot of times when you switch modes, it has different functions to it. There's hidden functions inside there as well. So let's start at the beginning, your ride start button. This is typically the button that's used to actually power up the ride in the morning once all the conditions are met and everything is okay. You typically do something like press and hold the ride start button, and you sometimes have to do it multiple times in a row to actually do what's called starting the ride. Starting the ride doesn't automatically fire up lift hills and stuff like that. It puts it in a state where it's ready to be turned on.
That's what she said.
And it's ready to have the lift hill turned on. It's ready for booster motors to be turned on. It's ready for a drive to be enabled, something like that. So that is your ride start button. The ride start button also typically sounds an external alarm, very necessary on rides for safety to let the people know in the surrounding area that that ride is powering up. If you're in an infield of a ride and suddenly you hear an external power-up alarm where the alarms are going off, it means that something's about to come through possibly where you are. So depending on the ride, you might want to get out of there. The next one is a common question I get on email a lot. Hey, what's the difference between ride stop and e-stop? Well, that's really just a difference in recovery. That's what you have to look at that as. So a ride stop is simply pushing a stop button, and it typically stops motion. It tells the rides to stop. When they come up into the brakes, it says, hey, stop the ride there, and it brings everything to a halt. An e-stop will also do the same thing, except for a lot of times it won't let you recover the ride without going for a full startup process. You might have to go into maintenance mode. You might have to do all sorts of stuff like that. It's a pain in the butt to recover from an e-stop or an emergency stop. So the difference is that recovery from a ride stop mode, you might be able to go to the ride and simply just press and hold the ride start button for a couple of seconds, maybe do it twice in a row, and the ride will literally go back into motion. It picks right back up where it was and continues on its merry way. An e-stop, it won't do that. It'll drop out power. It drops out power to drives. It'll kill fans. It'll stop pumps. It'll do all sorts of stuff where you have to have maintenance come out and recover the ride from that particular mode. So ride stop, think about it like a lot of times operations can recover a ride stop and they can just put the ride back into motion themselves. An emergency stop typically means maintenance is going to show up. Sometimes they are in fact the same thing. Think about a scrambler running. There's only the motor in the center that turns the whole thing. So it's not necessary to have a difference between a stop and an emergency stop. They are in fact in the same circuit. A lot of small rides, that stop circuit is interrupted with all sorts of things. We had a little kids pirate ship, I believe it was. Can't remember who made that one. It was an off manufacturer. But the stop circuit was basically the start circuit that was just interrupted. Because the whole time it was running, you had to have the start enabled. So the stop circuit basically had the ride stop, and then underneath it was the e-stop, and then underneath it was the on key, underneath it was the operator present key, underneath it was the foot pedal, and then at the very bottom was the start. So it's just the one wire that was interrupted all those times for that. Quite ridiculous, but not so much on bigger rides. The ESR, so the emergency stop powers the ESR circuit. Emergency stop relay is typically what that is. So the emergency stop relay is typically, it's a physical relay in the cabinet. It's a very large relay, which means it has tons of contacts. On the back of here, these guys allow what's called contact stacking. Like if you can see that little red indicator that sits right there. Maybe if I do that, maybe, not sure. That red indicator, when I open this up, it retracts back in. Well, I could take another one of these contact blocks and I can essentially stack it on top of this one and put two little screws in it to hold it. And then, see right there, that screw? That screw allows another screw to go down on top of it. So I could just start taking these contact blocks and stacking them up, as many as I want to. That is essentially an emergency stop relay too. The relay has all sorts of contacts just stacked on top of them. They're really big relays, but they feed power to almost everything in the ride. Not big, high amperage power. They feed control power to stuff. Like all the motors that run, they take a ton of contactors to pull in and move. All the voltage for those contactors run through the e-stop. So when I push the e-stop, it opens up all the contactors and prevents the big voltage from going out. Remember, controlling rides is all about using small voltage to control really big stuff. So I've had this question recently, hey, why does an e-stop actually drop out the power? Like, how does that, they were thinking, does all the big power run through the e-stop? Like, does it have huge cables underneath? It's like, nope, relays. It's all relay driven. So the ESR, emergency stop relay, is typically monitored at the panel. So you might look in there and say, oh, is my ESR on or off? Which means, is my emergency stop relay on or off? This would be used to say, like, you come in and the e-stop button is up. Well, did anyone push the e-stop? No, but the ESR relay is dropped out. The ESR, the emergency stop, is not the only thing that will drop that out. Drives and other systems can also drop that relay out too when they register a problem with their circuitry as well. So one of the things you have to do in the morning time, one of the first things you do is after everything is all set up and you're good to go and all the e-stops are in their up position, you typically use another key, another function, go to some panel, and you do an ESR reset. And as soon as you touch it on the panel view or maybe a physical button and hit that, that big emergency stop relay pulls in and it activates all the emergency stops on the ride so they're ready to go for everything. The next one is a block reset. We talked about this earlier. Block resets happen when there's wrong block information in there. It happens all the time. If you're a mechanic, you work on these rides, a lot of times you'll lock the ride out partially and go do things. By partially, I mean most of the time mechanics lock out the high voltage side, not the low voltage side. What's that mean? That means those little proximity sensors and things like that all over the track are still live. They're still active. They're only 24 volts and they can't do anything. But if you're walking along working next to something and your keys flag a proximity sensor, I'm going to get some comments about this one. If your keys or a wrench or something flags a proximity sensor, you have now just told the computer that there is a train right where you are. The computer does not forget. It puts that into its logic, and now that train is stuck there. And you can't send any trains through that one either, because that's what the block safety system is for. So you have to go into a special mode. It takes 2 to 3 people sometimes, or maybe even more depending on the ride, to go in and use the block reset function. And you go in there and you tell whatever zone it was in, you say reset the block, and it goes okay. Older rides built in the mid-90s, somewhere around there, they had a key switch that would do that one function over the entire track. So a lot of rides had this issue when you powered them up. It would power up the low voltage side as well as the high voltage side at the same time. The byproduct of this was that because sensors were turning on sometimes slower than what the PLC would actually turn on as, the PLC would actually register that there's ghost trains all over the entire track. So the manufacturer just gave you a key on the panel to go block reset, and it reset every single block all at the same time. Now, what did this do where the trains were? It would typically just say, okay, there's a train right there, and the block would occupy again. But where you have to be careful about that stuff is, again, where the smiler happened, is that when you reset that block, there's nothing else, there's nothing actually in that block. For instance, the SLC I worked on, from the time it was powered on to the time you could reset the block was 45 seconds. There was a time delay in that block reset because when the train went over the lift hill to the time it showed back up in the brakes was 45 seconds. So they were trying to plan for the worst case scenario that train left, and then as soon as that train left, you shut the ride off, turned it back on, and did a block reset. So they're like, they didn't want that to happen. They didn't want you to clear the main run block while the train was out on the track. So they said 45 seconds. Once that passes by, we should see that train back in the brakes. If it's out there, then you do the reset. Those systems weren't that great because with only one person doing it, that allows for accidents. Could the train be valleyed out on the track? Yes, it could be valleyed out on the track. Hit that block reset? Yep, you just wiped that train out. Could you send another one? Yes, you could. Much care and exercise has to be taken around the block reset function. Air gates, talked about this one earlier too. A lot of times they are maintained switches, so not so much a key switch, but you'll have the air gates will be closed, air gates open. Let people come in, air gates closed again. Like the panel that Coasterclimax was showing, the exact same way. You just use those maintain selectors to go open, closed, or on or off, whatever it is. Sometimes those are done in the controller to where the controller is not looking for a full signal to open or close. It just needs a momentary because the controller is sending the open and close signals. So the logic is latched one direction. So you press the button and it says close, and you press the button and then the PLC says open. And it also monitors its gates on both sides to make sure the signals match, and when it told the gates to open, they did in fact open. Where you get into problems is when people don't stay off the air gates and the PLC is sending the signal that says, I'm closed, and then the people force the air gates open momentarily and that drops out, then the ride shuts off. It's like, nope, your air gates were open when you told them not to be. Stay off the air gates, please. Restraints, lock and unlock. This is one that operators use all the time. So on the panel, most rides have a all unlock or all lock. So it's a single button you could push to all unlock the restraints and push it again and they all lock back. Then a lot of times there are multiple buttons on there, like use a B&M with 8 rows. There are typically 4 rows, 4 buttons on there. You'll have unlock 1 and 2, unlock 3 and 4, unlock 5 and 6, unlock 7 and 8. When you push those buttons, they're momentary. It will unlock rows 1 and 2. As soon as you take your thumb off of it, they lock back instantly. These are for when you're going down and say, oh, you can't ride with that loose article on there. You have to put it over there in the cubbies. They'll give them the signal and say, hey, unlock rows 1 and 2. It's like, okay, they hit unlock. Those restraints open. They go over and they come back. By that time, they're locked again, so they just go down, pull them back shut. Maintenance mode, again, that is for maintenance personnel to come in and do things that the automatic mode can't do. Auto mode is their basic. It has the ride start, lift hill start, dispatch, some air gate controls, a bunch of the stuff we just talked about. Maintenance mode is things where you can come in and like, I want to run those motors in reverse. I want to put a train away into transfer. I want to jog the lift hill. I want to open the brakes. It gives me individual control over most components in the ride. Now, that is not the exact same maintenance function for everything. Some rides, the maintenance mode is very dumb. It doesn't really do anything apart from what the automatic did. A lot of times on the older rides, the maintenance function only gets you the ability to like open brakes. Just go, all the brakes open, and you let go of them, all the brakes shut back. Automatic mode pretty much allows you to do the rest of the stuff. Some rides like that get more complicated, like boomerangs, they'll allow you to go like, I want to run the catch wagon up and down lift 1. You have to do that in manual mode. Then you switch over to lift 2 and say, I want to exercise the chain on lift 2. Then you switch back over. The modes are just divided up depending on the ride, so there's not a very specific standard between everything, but just know that maintenance guys need maintenance functions for certain reasons to operate whatever particular function they're looking at. Automatic mode generally won't let you do individual things like that. The last one is the maintenance bypass. Now, maintenance bypassing, I mentioned it earlier, is a function that we have to use in order to run the ride in the morning time. Most of our rides at the park require 2 people to dispatch. That's a common scenario. You need the main operator to look down one side of the train and say, yep, it's clear, and you need the secondary to look down the other side of the train and say, yep, it's clear. They agree together, they push the buttons, the train dispatches. What happens in the morning time when you only have one maintenance guy? A lot of people think, well, there's teams of maintenance guys working on these things. A lot of times, no, there's not. There's actually just one person working on it. So what happens when I'm at a ride that needs 3 people to dispatch, and I'm there by myself? Well, we put the ride into a maintenance bypass, and this is where it's in automatic mode. We have the ride started in automatic mode, just like the operators do, and then we come up with our special key and we put it in, and we turn on the maintenance bypass. And then as soon as we turn on the maintenance bypass, the only thing that really changes is you look down the panel, and now our dispatch lights are flashing. The train's ready to dispatch. Because when I turn that maintenance bypass key on, I've now told it that I don't care about the rest of the operators on the ride. I am the sole operator that will move everything. We don't like to use that, especially with people in the park, because you typically can't see all aspects of the ride. Having 2 people dispatch is a safety function. That's not just because. It's a safety function. We want to make sure that there's nobody around that train. Ride vehicles weigh on average about 10 tons. It's a lot, 20,000 pounds. The ride system moves those vehicles in and out all day, no problem. You think you're going to stand in front of or hold on to one of those vehicles and even try to affect it, you're wrong. In fact, you're dead wrong, because you'll be dead doing that. So it's essential that when the park is closed and no one's there, we use maintenance bypass to run it by ourselves. When it's open, we're troubleshooting and doing things like that. A lot of times we will ask operations to run the ride, even though we're there and we could run it, but it's because they have the safety checks. They look for the gates, they look for guests coming in. If we run it in bypass without operations, we necessarily can't see all that. So it becomes pretty dangerous with the park open to run a ride in bypass mode, typically frowned upon. The last little segment I wanted to catch on just momentarily is remote operator panels. Now, we talked earlier how you have a primary and a secondary operator panel. Well, a lot of times you'll still have a primary operator panel where you have someone looking over all the function of the rides, but your secondary operator panels are nowhere to be seen. Well, they're actually with the operators themselves. There's a lot of rides out there where they use constant move ride platform loadings where they're just constantly walking on there. Well, they don't want to walk against that movement and go back to a panel while they're walking, trying to press and hold a button to get the vehicles to leave. So a lot of live load stations use remote operator panels. And by I mean remote, I literally mean remote. It is wireless. It has a safety signal running through it constantly, so the PLC is in constant contact with it and it knows that it's okay. And the operators, when they're ready to dispatch, can simply reach over and push the button. This has been used on plenty of rides out there. I got video of it being used on the Secret Life of Pets dark ride at Universal Studios. But I know this was also an upgrade for Sky Coasters. Instead of using a manual pendant where they had to hold the buttons and move the launch cables up and down, they could actually use a remote pendant and just hold it and walk all over the place as they needed to. So that's a newer thing that came in. Then it was a kind of a short-lived period of time because now manufacturers have figured out RFID tagging and stuff like that where they simply don't need it anymore. They interact with the train directly. Once the ride operators are done checking restraints, they'll just go through and tag the side of the restraint and it says those rows are good. The computers communicating with the train back and forth. Once it says everything is good, it just kicks it out. That's really cool. Really cool stuff. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out. I do appreciate it. If you want to give me an extra hand, please go watch another video. I do appreciate that as well. And that does help the channel out. It helps us grow. Again, check out my friend over there at Coasterclimax. Use the code Ryan5 if you want a 5% discount at checkout. If you want to buy one of those panels to go work on your Sims, No Limits coaster. Looks like a pretty sweet deal, and from the cost and what she's put into that, it looks like a good price. If you want to contact me, you can always leave a comment downstairs. I try to read all the comments that come through the channel. I might not be able to respond to all of them, but I try. Or you can email me at ryantheridemechanic@yahoo.com. Stay off the air gates. Bye.